I noticed with my patients, particularly with people that are in public life, that they have a certain way of presenting themselves. For instance, take the doctor. He has a certain way. For instance, he has good bedside manners, and he behaves as one expects a doctor behaves. He may even identify himself with it and believe that he is what he appears to be. He must appear in a certain form, unless people don't believe that he's a doctor. And so when he's a professor, he's also supposed to behave in a certain way so that it is plausible that he is a professor, you know. So the persona is partially the result of the demands society has. And on the other side, it is a compromise with what one likes to be, or as one likes to appear. So the persona is a certain complicated system of behavior, which is partially dictated by society and partially dictated by the expectations or the wishes one nurses oneself. Now, this is not the real personality, in spite of the fact that people will assure you that that is all quite real and quite honest. Yet it is not. Now, the performance of the persona is quite all right as long as you know that you are not identical with the way in which you appear. But if you are unconscious of this fact, then you get into sometimes very disagreeable conflicts. Namely, people can't help noticing that at home, for instance, you are quite different from what you appear to be in public. Yes. And people who don't know it stumble over it in the end. They deny that they are like that, but they are like that. They are it. And then you don't know, now, which is the real man?
Yes.
Is he the man as he is at home or in intimate relations? Or is he the man that appears in public? It is a question of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes.
It is occasionally there is such a difference that you would almost be able to speak of double personality.
Yes.
And the more that is pronounced, the more people are neurotic.
Yes.
They get neurotic because they have two different ways. They contradict themselves all the time, and in as much as they are unconscious of themselves, they don't know it. They think they're all one. Everybody sees that they are two.
Yes.
And some know him only from one side, so others know him only from the other side. And then there are situations that clash, because the way you are creates certain situations with people in your relations, and these two situations don't chime in. They are just dissonances.
Yes.
And the more that is the case, the more the people are neurotic. The self is merely a term that designates the whole personality, because the whole personality of man is indescribable.
Yes.
His consciousness can be described. His unconscious cannot be described, right. Because the unconscious, as I must repeat myself, is always unconscious.
Yeah.
And it is really unconscious. Yeah. It really does not know it.
Does not know about it.
And so we don't know our unconscious personality. We have hints, we have certain ideas, but we don't know it really. Nobody can say where man ends.
Yes.
That is the beauty of it, you know.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Yeah. The unconscious of man can reach God knows where. There we are going to make discoveries. You see, this is simply practical, because there are certain people who definitely are more influenced by their surroundings than by their own intentions. While there are other people who are more influenced by the subjective factor. When you observe the world, you see people, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you observe yourself within, you see moving images.
Yes.
A world of images, generally known as fantasies. Yet these fantasies are facts. It is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life.
Yes.
Or a bridge is built.
Yes.
These houses were all fantasies.
Yes.
Everything you do here, all of the houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless. And so psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world within. Because the psyche, you know, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discovered that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect.
Yes. Yes.
And so it is simply the world from within, seen from within.
Yes.
The world hangs on a thin thread.
Yeah.
And that is the psyche of man. Assume that certain fellows in Moscow lose their nerve or their common sense for a bit. And the whole world is in fire and flames.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is, nowadays we are not threatened by elementary catastrophes. There is no such thing as an H-bomb. That is all man's doing.
Yeah.
We are the great danger. Psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche?
Yeah.
See? And it is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of the psyche is, how important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. Nobody would give credit to the idea that the psychical processes of the ordinary man have any importance whatever. One thinks, oh, he has just what he has in his head, it is all from his surroundings, he's taught such and such a thing, believes such and such a thing. And particularly if he's well housed and well fed, then he has no idea at all. That's the great mistake. Because he is just that as which he is born, and he is not born as tabula rasa, but as a reality.
Yes.
Bismarck once said, God may protect me against my friends. With my enemies, I can deal myself alone. You know how people are. They catch a word, and then everything is schematized along that word. There is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert.
Yes.
Such a man would be the lunatic asylum. Those are only terms to designate a certain penchant, a certain tendency. For instance, the tendency to be more influenced by environmental influences or more influenced by the subjective factor. That's all.
Yes.
The classification of individuals means nothing at all. This is only the instrumentarium for the practical psychologists. Yeah. One of the most difficult types is the intuitive introvert.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
The intuitive extrovert, you find among hunters, bankers, gamblers.
Yes.
Well, that is quite understandable.
Yes.
But the introvert is more difficult because he has intuitions as to the subjective factor, namely the inner world.
Yes.
And of course that is now very difficult to understand, because what he sees are most uncommon things, and he doesn't like to talk of them.
Yes.
If he's not a fool, because he would spoil his own game by telling what he sees, because people won't understand it.
Yes.
For instance, once I had a patient, a young woman, about 27 or 8, and her first words were, when I had treated her, she said, you know, doctor, I come to you because I have a snake in my abdomen. I said, what? Yes, a snake, a black snake, coiled up right in the bottom of my abdomen. And I must have made a rather bewildered face at her. And she said, you know, I don't mean it literally, but I should say it was a snake. It was a snake. So you see, if the introverted intuitive would speak what he really perceives, then practically nobody would understand it. He would be misunderstood. And so they learn to keep things to themselves. And you hardly ever hear them talking of these things. That is a great disadvantage. But it is an enormous advantage in another way. Not to speak of the experience they gather, but also in human relations. For instance, they come into the presence of somebody they don't know, and certainly they have inner images. You know, that is, but the case can also happen that they come into the presence of somebody who they don't know at all, and they know an important piece out of the biography of that person, and are not aware of it, and tell the story. Then the fat is in the fire. You see? So the introverted intuitive has, in a way, a very difficult life, although one of the most interesting lives. My definition is, intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious. That is as near as I can get. Now this is a very important function, because when you live under primitive conditions, a lot of unpredictable things are likely to happen. And there you need your intuition, because you cannot possibly tell by your perceptions, by your sense perceptions, what there is going to happen. For instance, you are traveling in primeval forest. You only see for a few steps ahead. You go by the compass perhaps, and you don't know what there is ahead. It is uncharted country. If you use your intuition, then you have hunches. And when you live under such primitive conditions, you instantly are aware of hunches. For instance, there are places that are favorable, there are places that are not favorable. You can't tell for your life what it is. But you better follow these hunches. Because anything can happen. You see, and quite unforeseen things. For instance, at the end of a long day, you approach a river, and you don't know that there is a river. Yet, when you come to the river, that is quite unexpected. For miles there is no human habitation. You cannot swim across. It's all full of crocodiles. So what? You see? Now, such an obstacle hasn't been foreseen. But it may be that you have had a hunch, that you remained in the last likely spot, and that you wait for the following day, that you can build a raft or something of the sort, or look out for possibilities. What the unconscious has to say is so disagreeable that one prefers not to listen. And in most cases, the people would be probably less neurotic if they could admit the things. Because these things are always a bit difficult, or disagreeable, or inconvenient, or something of the sort. So there is always a certain amount of repression. But that is not the main thing. The main thing is that they are really unconscious. And you see, if you are unconscious about certain things that ought to be conscious, then you are dissociated. And then you are a man whose left hand never knows what the right is doing, and counteracts or interferes with the right hand. Now such a man is hampered all over the place. He doesn't repress consciously always. These things disappear simply. They disappear, and Freud explains that by an act of repression. But you can prove that these things never have been conscious before. They simply don't appear. And you don't know why they don't appear. Of course, you can say, when it comes up, you can say, that is why they didn't appear, because they were disagreeable or incompatible with his conscious views, with his conscious attitude. But that is afterwards. You couldn't predict it. So you see, these things that have an emotional tone, they are partially autonomous. So that they can appear, or the contrary, they do not appear.
Yes.
They can disappear at wish, not of the subject, but of their own.
Yes.
Or you also can repress them.
Yes.
But it is so the same with projections. For instance, people say one makes projections.
Yes.
It's nonsense. One doesn't make them, one finds them.
Yes.
That are already there. They are already unconscious.
Already unconscious, I see.
But you are not the one that is doing it.
Yes.
Because you see, the unconscious is real.
Yes.
It is an entity. It works by itself. It is autonomous. When you study human psychology, you can't help noticing that man's psychology doesn't only consist of the ramifications of instinct in his behavior. Instincts are not the only determinants. There are many others. And the study of man from his biological aspect only is by far insufficient to understand human psychology. It is absolutely necessary that you study man also in his social and general environments.
Yes.
So you have to consider, for instance, the fact that there are different kinds of society, different kinds of nations, different traditions, and to that purpose it is absolutely necessary that one treats the problem of the human psyche from many standpoints, and each is most considerable task, naturally. Thus, after my association experiments, when I realized, now, what is this unconscious? Does it consist merely of rests, of remnants, of conscious activities, or are there things that are practically forever unconscious? In other words, is the unconscious a factor in itself? And I soon came to the conclusion that the unconscious must be a factor in itself, because I observed time and again that, for instance, the people's dreams or schizophrenic patients' delusions, fantasies, contain the motives which they couldn't possibly have acquired in our surroundings. This depends upon the fact that child is not born tabula rasa, but it is a definite mixture of or combination of genes. 50 years ago, we already had these cases, ulcer of the stomach, tuberculosis, chronic arthritis, skin diseases.
Yes.
All psychogenous under certain conditions.
Yes. And even cancer, the fact that cancer may have...
Well, you see, I couldn't swear.
Yeah.
But I have seen cases where I thought, now, I should wonder whether there was not a psychogenic reason for that particular ailment. It came too conveniently. You see, to us it was always a question how to treat these things, and anything is possible. Every disease has a psychological accompaniment.
Yeah.
And it all depends, perhaps life depends upon it, whether you treat such a patient psychologically in the proper way or not.
Yeah.
That can help tremendously.
Yeah.
Even if you cannot prove in the least that the disease itself is psychogenous.
Yeah.
Or you can have an infectious disease in a certain moment or ailment or predicament.
Yeah.
Because you are particularly accessible to an infection.
Yeah.
Because angina is such a typical psychological disease.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yet it is not psychological in its physical position.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just an infection.
Yeah.
But why then? Well, it was a psychological moment.
Yes. Yeah.
And you see, when it is established and there's high fever and an abscess, you cannot cure it by psychology.
Yeah.
Yet it's quite possible that you can avoid it by a proper psychological attitude.
Yeah. Yeah.
One doesn't see what an education without humanities is doing to man.
Yeah.
He loses the connection with his family, as it were. That means with the whole stem, the tribe, the connection with the past, that he lives in that in which man always has lived. Man has always lived in the myth. And we think we are able to be born today and to live in no myth, without history. That is a disease. That's absolutely abnormal, because man is not born every day. He is once born in a specific historical setting with specific historical qualities, and therefore he is only complete when he has a relation to these things. It's just as if you were born without eyes and ears, when you are growing up with no connection with the past. That is a mutilation of the human being. You are in possession of all the important items in a person's development. I remember, for instance, I analyzed a very well-known American politician, and he told me, any amount of the secrets of his trade. and suddenly he jumped up and said, "By God, what have I done? You know, you get $1 million for what I have told you now." I said, "Well, I'm not interested. You can sleep in peace. I shall not betray you. I forget it within a fortnight." Now, you see, that creates an emotional relationship to the analysis. And that is what Freud called the transference. Yes. Which is a central problem of analytic psychology. It is just so as if these people had handed out their whole existence, and that can have very peculiar effects upon the individual. Either they hate you for it or they love you for it, but you are not indifferent to them. And there is then a sort of emotional relation with the patient. Now that made a tremendous impression upon that girl, and instantly it clicked. She saw what she really was missing, that missing value that was in the form of a projection in myself and made myself indispensable to her. Yes. And then she saw, it is not indispensable, because it is, as the dream says, she is in the arms of that archetypal idea. Now that is a luminous experience, and that is the thing that people are looking for. Yes. An archetypal experience that gives them an incorruptible value. You see, they depend upon other conditions, they depend upon their desires, their ambitions, depend upon other people, because they have no value in themselves. They have nothing in themselves. They are only rational, and they are not in the possession of a treasure that would make them independent. But when that girl can hold that experience, then she doesn't depend anymore. She cannot depend anymore, because that value is in herself. And that is a sort of liberation. Yeah. And that is, of course, makes her complete, Inasmuch as she can realize such a luminous experience, she is able to continue her path, her way, her individuation. The acorn can become an oak and not a donkey. Nature will take her course. She will become that which she is from the beginning. Made no sense. What is our existence, when we are just average numbers, The more you make people to average numbers, the more you destroy our society. Yeah. The ideal state is then a slave state. Then you can go to Russia. There it's wonderful. There you can be a number, but one pays it very dearly. Our whole life goes to places.
There are so many indications that one doesn't know what one sees. Is it trees or is it the wood? It's very difficult to say, because the dreams, people's dreams, contain apprehensions, But it is very difficult to say whether they point to a war, because that idea is uppermost in people's mind. Formerly, you know, it has been much simpler. People didn't think of a war. And therefore, it was rather clear what the dreams meant. Nowadays, no more so. We are so full of apprehensions, fears, that one doesn't know exactly to what it points. But one thing is sure, a great change of our psychological attitude is imminent. That is certain. Because we need more psychology. We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied, because we are the origin of all coming evil. You see, the word belief is a difficult thing for me. I don't believe. I must have a reason for a certain hypothesis. Either I know a thing, and when I know it, I don't need to believe it. If I don't allow myself, for instance, to believe a thing just for the sake of believing it. I can't believe it. But when there are sufficient reasons for a certain hypothesis, I shall accept these reasons, naturally, and should say, we have to reckon with the possibility of so-and-so, you know. Well, you see, I have treated many old people, and it's quite interesting to watch what the unconscious is doing with the fact that it is apparently threatened with a complete end. It disregards it. Life behaves as if it were going on. And so I think it is better for old people to live on, to look forward to the next day, as if he had to spend centuries. And then he lives properly. But when he is afraid, when he doesn't look forward, he looks back, he petrifies, he gets stiff, and he dies before his time. But when he is living on, looking forward to the great adventure that is ahead, then he lives. And that is about what the unconscious is intending to do. Of course, it's quite obvious that we are all going to die, and this is the sad finale of everything. But nevertheless, there is something in us that doesn't believe it, apparently. But this is merely a fact, a psychological fact. It doesn't mean to me that it proves something. It is simply so. For instance, I may not know why we need salt, but we prefer to eat salt too, because you feel better. And so when you think in a certain way, you may feel considerably better. And I think if you think along the lines of nature, then you think properly. I think there will be a reaction. A reaction will set in against this communal dissociation. You know, man doesn't stand forever his nullification. Once there will be a reaction. And I see it setting in, you know, when I think of my patients, they all seek their own existence, and to assure their existence against that complete atomization into nothingness or into meaninglessness. Man cannot stand a meaningless life. I particularly had a difficulty with certain teachers that didn't believe that I could write a decent thesis. I remember one case where the teacher had the habit to discuss the papers written by the pupils, and he took the best first, and he went through the whole number of the pupils, and I didn't appear, and I was badly troubled over it, and I thought, well, it is impossible that my thesis can be that bad. And when he had finished, he said, there is still one paper left over, and that is the one by Jung. That would be by far the best paper if it hadn't been copied. He has just copied it somewhere, stolen. You are a thief, Jung. And if I knew where you had stolen it, I would fling you out of school. And I got mad, and I said, this is the one thesis where I have worked the most, because the theme was interesting, in contradistinction, you know, to other themes which are not at all interesting to me. And then he said, you are a liar, and if you can prove that you have stolen that thing somewhere, then you get out of school. Now that was a very serious thing to me, because what else then, you see?
Do you now believe in God?
Now? Difficult to answer. I know. I don't need to believe. I know.